Hi, this tutorial looks at how to send a future payment transaction to the Algorand blockchain, and in fact, it works for all transaction types for Algorand. The background to this is that an account may want to process payments not now, but in a future day or date. That means the transaction is going to occur outside the current block round of 1,000 blocks on the Algorand chain. So there will be the need to calculate the time difference and also the future block round during which the transaction should be submitted. So to do this, you will need to first, of course, set up the Algorand SDK, depending on how you want to import it or include it in your script. And then also put in your mnemonic phrase to retrieve the Algorand address, the account, and the address as well, which will be used to process the transaction and sign it as well. And for this tutorial, I'm using the Algo Explorer API, and I'm doing this over the testnet. So to get the params for the first round and the last round, this is the endpoint. And also in posting transactions to the chain, this is also the endpoint. These are not going to change, and so I'm declaring them as constant at the beginning of the script. Then it's a function that is used to just fetch or post transaction URLs, transactions to the chain. So it takes a get or a post request type, and also you provide the URL type. So it's either the get param URL or the post URL, depending on which stage and the purpose. So with this in place, first then is to get a time difference between the future transaction date and now. So assuming I want to send a transaction in 2 days time or 3 hours time. So today's date is the 20th. So I'll set that to 20 January, and as at the time of the, let's say I want the transaction to go at 17:20 UTC. Then the future date, the current date will be now, and then you convert this date into a date in JavaScript. Then you get the difference in seconds. So you round it up and subtract the current date from the future date, and then you round it by 1,000 to make sure you get the difference, and also you convert it into seconds. So Algorand does transactions per second, and so it is best in calculating the future time to do it in seconds. Then after getting the time difference, the next step is to get the block round. So the future block round during which the transactions need to be submitted. So the block round is gotten by dividing the time reference by the transactions per second. So Algorand processes an averagely a transaction in 4.5 seconds. It can be lower or higher, but 4.5 seems to be average using Algo Explorer. Once we divide by that, we come by 1,200. So it means the transaction will be submitted outside the current block range of 1,000. So you would need to calculate a different block range first and last round during which the transactions should be submitted. With this in mind, we proceed to getting the current last round. So we need to get the current last round, and based on which we then calculate the future first and last round. So the current last round, we get that from the Algo Explorer. So just get the current last round. You fetch that from using the function I explained earlier. And so assuming the current last round is this, you then have to get a future first round. So that's the future first round. You get that by adding 1,200, the time to the next block. That's 1,200 blocks to the current block. So it means that our transaction should be occurring from the first round of this block. So now it means that this is going to be the first round of the future transaction. In getting the last round of the future transaction, this is where then you add the 1,000. Remember I said Algorand transactions are within a 1,000 block range. So within that, you add 1,000 to the first future round to get the last future round. Now, once you have these, the first round and the last round for your future transactions, it is okay to then start constructing the transaction parameters. So you get the suggested params. Now we are using a flat fee, and then we have our first round, the last round, and also Genesis ID and Genesis hash are static, and so you can put these in for now. And I retrieved that using Algo Explorer as well. And then the future recipient. So this is the address that is going to receive the transactions, and the amount is one algo. And we just add in a note, invoice payment. This is just for demonstration's sake. And now that this is where I also set in the timeout. So remember, this is a future transaction, and there are options to do this, right? You can sign and save the transaction and process it later using a cron job. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm using a set timeout to make sure that this script stops executing this portion of the transaction until we reach the block round, or the time during which the transaction should be submitted. And so to get a timeout period, you multiply the difference in seconds by 1,000. So this is just because the set out function in JavaScript is calculated in milliseconds. And so to convert the seconds to milliseconds, you multiply it by 1,000. This is just to make sure we get the right time when we get to the timeout function. Then you sign the transaction in Algorand using the retrieve account and the mnemonic phrase that we did earlier. Then you begin the timeout period. So here you're telling the JavaScript to timeout, don't execute, wait. When the time is up, post this transaction to the Algorand chain using the URL as well as the signed transaction. And so the timeout period is that what we set up here, which is the time difference by 1,000 milliseconds. So it's going to wait by this milliseconds, and during which it is going to submit the transaction to make sure that we are within the designated block range, and also that the script executes at that time to submit the transaction. Thank you. You can try this and let us have discussions to see if there's any feedback or suggestions or ways to improve it.